Matt Christian with EliteGolfPerformance.net with my friend here, world-renowned golf artist Jim Fitzpatrick. We're at Poppy Hills Golf Course. Beautiful place. And right now, typically I go on and tell a little bit more about what we're doing and get into golf instruction and all these things. But really, I want you guys to meet Jim and him tell his stories about all these great players and his photography and all the things that he's done with the years. Take it over.
All right. Well, they're really not my stories, but I've been very fortunate for 40 years doing golf paintings and being at events. This was actually the same thing over at Pebble today. Worth 1,000 words. What if you don't know the words? Then it's just a pretty picture, And as the artist, you really don't like to hear that because you want them to like the art, but I can't help it. Some of the stories are phenomenal. They're just incredible. Like up here, I have the 7th hole at Pebble, and I originally did that for one of the earlier Crosbys. And it was the cover to the players' program. They all get a little program that tells them the series of events for the week. And so I really didn't have it on display during the tournament, but the next tournament back in those days was the Hope. So I had it on display at the Hope, and a bunch of the players, Lon Hinkle and a bunch of the guys were saying, "Oh my God, that hole, it's one of the shortest holes in golf, and it's one of the most difficult." They said the wind blows there. I've hit 2-iron and put it in the bunker, and I've hit 6-iron and blown it out to sea. And you can't figure because it doesn't stay the same. The wind gusts, and Ben Crenshaw was standing over there, and he's got his arms folded, and he's just nodding. He's not saying it, he's just nodding. And I go, "Well, Ben, what?" He's, "No. Come on, you can't say that. You're what?" He says, "Well, you wouldn't even believe me if I told you." And I said, "Well, now you have to tell me." He says, "Jim, these guys are right. You never know what to hit on there because you're 80 feet above the actual green surface, and the wind is always blowing, and it does. It gusts and then stops altogether." He said, "You could hit a perfect layup shot and it could fly out in the ocean. There's no way to know." So he said, "I got up there one time, it was blowing so hard I didn't want to hit anything in the air." He said, "I took a putter and I rolled it into the bunker, and I knew that if I hit a good bunker shot, I could make a par. The worse I'm going to make some bogey, that takes 5 and 6 out of the equation." So I went, "Wow, that's unbelievable. That's what you do." He said, "I made the putt." So I made 3, rolling it down the hill. So years later, I was at Augusta. I was waiting for a friend of mine, Charlie Yates, who was the secretary, and he stays in the Butler cabin. So I'm right out in front of the Butler cabin waiting for Charlie. And Sarrazin, who was an announcer back then and the official starter, he drives up in a cart, and I have my portfolio, this book full of artwork, and Gene looks over and he goes, "Jim, what do you got in that book?" And he's kind of crusty at this time, he's about 80. And I said, "A bunch of my art." "Well, come over here, let me see that. Sit down." So I'm sitting in the cart with Gene Sarrazin going through this artwork, and they didn't, they didn't do selfies back then. I'd pay anything to have one of those, but anyway. So we go page by page, and I'm telling my stories, and he's telling a few. And I get to that picture of 7 at Pebble, and I tell him the Ben Crenshaw story, and he looks over at me and he goes, "Well, I hope to hell he doesn't think that's anything new. I did that same thing 40 years ago." So I thought that was a great story.
Do you have any pictures of Kite when he won it? It was 92, right?
Yeah.
When he on at Pebble Beach where
I was
7th hole.
I was there, and that's where he made the chip that really won the tournament.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was the turning point.
It was amazing, but I did not get a picture of that, but I was there, and I've done a couple of drawings of him from that event. But he, what a guy Kite was. I used to watch him a lot, and Tom, his process was the same. He'd play golf, he'd get done, he'd have a bite to eat, then he'd go practice till dark.
That's right.
And his chipping and putting, his up and down, I mean, I remember watching him one time, and I score it was, but I'm looking at him play and I'm going, oh my God, he's going to be lucky to break 80. He was all over the place. And then we get done, and I look at the scorecard, he shot 72. Because no matter how bad he hits it, he never gives a stroke away. He grinds, and that's actually going to be, to me, the key this week.
Yep.
At Wingfoot.
That is exactly what it's going to be. So I worked with Tom Cotton and his son David.
Oh wow!
I don't know if you knew that or not.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, so I was through Chuck Cook. I was taught him biomechanics, 3D, emotion analysis, and all that before. Nobody even knew really what that stuff was.
Oh,
and now everybody has it. But yeah, I worked with him, and David played in South Carolina as well. And it was like I said, it was through Chuck. Chuck's his coach. His name always will be, always has been. But even back then, the story about Kite was, he asked me one day, he said, meet me up at the Urban Center or whatever, Frank Urban Center there at University of Texas, the basketball, where they practice basketball.
Right.
And he trained with the basketball team. 55-year-old guy just giving it all kinds of hell. Yeah, and that's when I remember thinking, he's a warrior. He wasn't talented. He's not the most talented guy I've ever seen. And look at how much, at one point in his career, he was the all-time leading money winner at one point. I think it was mid-80s. And then he won a U.S. Open, obviously, and many other terms. But he was just such a competitor.
And he never, like I said, he never gave up a stroke. In that era, you didn't win a whole lot if you weren't first, second, or third. But Tom, for I don't know how long, was always in the top 20 and usually in the top 10.
He's a cash cow.
And that added up. And I think he was the first guy to go over some million-plus mark. It was incredible.
Yep. Yeah, it was. And like back then, his putting left him a little as he got older, like it leaves all of us. But back then, he was a cash cow. His best wedge player still this day I've ever worked with. Period.
Right.
And so that was a lot of fun. So let's go to Casper. We have a mutual friend with Byron Casper, so Byron will get to watch this, I'm sure, and talk about his dad. That's the most underrated player in the history of golf, no question.
Well, he won 51 times on the tour. He won 3 majors. There was a time period in I think the 60s or the 70s where he won more than the big 3 all put together.
Yeah.
I mean, but nobody pays attention.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it was because what he did to Arnold. People loved Arnold so much they got mad at Billy.
Yep.
But to be 7 up with 7 holes left to play, and then Casper ties it. And then in the playoff, he was 7 up again with 7 to play, and Casper beats him.
Yep.
So when the Open came back to Olympic Club, I thought, well, geez, I need to do something. And I called Olympic Club, and they said, nah, we've already got a member who's an artist. He's doing something. So I kind of gave up. And then when I thought about the playoff from '66, I said, I can't let this go. So I called the head of the Northern California PGA, and I says, here's the deal. I'm going to do something of Casper and Palmer to represent that famous playoff. And I will donate $10,000 to junior golf. Well, that's sure nice of you guys. He says, no, under one condition. You got to guarantee me I have a place to show my artwork at Olympic Club. So he made that happen. And then I called Arnold and Billy. I called Billy first. And I says, any way to get 100 signatures? And he said, sure. And I said, it's for junior golf. And he said, no question. And then I called Arnold, and I was a little leery. And he goes, well, that's going to make Billy look pretty darn good. But since it's for junior golf, I'll do it. So I had 100 special prints. I did this one of Billy, and I did one of Arnie missing a putt. And then I did the 18th hole of Olympic, and it's triptych. So there's 3 pieces. And I sold 80 of them before the tournament even took place.
Wow. Pretty cool.
Yeah. That was really fun. And so I became pretty good friends with Billy. And what a nice guy he was.
I've had a lot of. I never met Billy, which I would have obviously, but Byron and I are very close, and his son. And Byron's he's a very good player.
Oh yeah,
teacher, great player, great teacher. And but he's got story after story. He and I both relate because our dads are a lot alike, but my dad wasn't. It's not a golf thing. It's just who they were as a person. Does that make sense? They were very much alike. It's a lot of common denominator.
Wow. Well, I still think I wish they would talk more about it, but there's a par 3 hole at Wingfoot that Billy laid up every single day.
That's right.
And he parred all 4 days by laying up on a par 3. And they call it a missed green. That sounds like it's a missed shot. It's not. It's proper course management.
Yeah.
And Billy had the greatest course management. And I've heard like Brandel Chambly and a couple of guys talking, and they're saying, well, a lot of places, if you're hole high, you're almost dead because there's so much break and it's guesswork. You need to be below the hole. So even if you're not on the green, and sometimes with firm greens and firm run-ups, you can actually be in the rough because you need to be at an angle where you can let the ball run and stay below the hole. Sometimes from the fairway you can't.
No.
So it's a combination, but it's course management, knowing the course and knowing where to be and playing it. And that's to me who's going to win. Whoever has the best course management.
It will be this week.
Yeah,
for sure, 100%. But move on a little bit. Let's tell us about this painting right here, Cypress.
Well, that's my.
I'll get over here and let you do your thing.
I think I've done over 250 paintings from around the world, and I think the year 2000, my wife and I were talking, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to be doing my 100th golf painting this year. It has to be 16 at Cypress because I've always loved that hole." And being here in Northern California, it's such an incredible part of golf history. And a lot of people don't realize this, but the gal in the upper left up there, a lady named Marion Hollins, actually founded Cypress Point. She worked for Sam Morris at Pebble Beach Properties, and she was a great athlete and a multiple amateur champion. And she rode horses and played tennis. So he hired her as director of athletics at Pebble Beach Properties. And after she was here for a period of time, she said to him, she said, you're going to have a great golf course at Pebble Beach, but you've got enough property. You could do a private course too. And there's a piece of land over there that's incredible. Well, he said, I don't have time for that. He was into trying to sell houses and property for homes. So he said, if you want to do that, I'll make you a deal on the property. But that's, So she went to her dad, who was a stockbroker for the one of the big families in New York, and had saved their bacon during the Depression. So he became the guru investor, and money was no problem. So she got Cypress Point founded and set up, and she picked Alistair McKenzie because she knew him. And this hole was originally designed as a par 4. And she kept saying, well, I think it'd be a great par 3. And McKenzie and Sam Morris, a guy named Hunter, who are all great golfers, said, no, we can't do that. It's just too difficult. We'll get crucified if we make that a par 3. But that's why there's back-to-back par 3s, because this was not a par 3. So the day before the course opened, they did a walk around, and she finally had everybody on site at the same time. They walked up to this tee right here, and she turned to the guys and she said, all right, you guys, if a woman can knock it on the green from right here, why can't it be a par 3? So they said, they were all shamed into saying, okay, I guess it could be. So she put one ball down, knocked it in the middle of the green. They took the scorecard that had already been printed, X'd out 4, closed the back tee, and the hole was never played as a par 4, but it was designed as a par 4.
That's pretty cool.
And then in the year 2000, it was voted greatest par 3 in all of golf.
I like it.
So I have another fun story. I have a bunch of stories on the hole, but I was in a famous golf pro's office. Billy Ogden was the head pro at North Shore Club during the summers, and in the winters, he was down in Palm Springs. And I was visiting and sitting talking, and he was in his late 60s at the time. And I look up, and there's a black and white photo of Mr. Hogan. And it's similar to that angle of Hogan right there, where you see what's behind him, but you don't see what he's aimed at. And I'm looking at this, and I see in this picture this little rickety fence that's on in 16. And I said, wow, that kind of looks like the 16th tee at Cypress. And he goes, it is. And the way he said it, I'm going, he's not telling me something. So I look at this picture closer, and the bags were up against that fence and some gallery people. And then inside the fence, there was a young man. And I kept looking at this guy's head. And I look at Billy sitting at his desk in this photograph, and I look at the shape of their heads, and I'm going, is that you? And he said, yep. He says, I was just a young, unknown pro, and luck of the draw, I got picked to play with Mr. Hogan. And Hogan had done an interview and said this would be his last Crosby. He was going to retire from tournament golf. And of course, he's playing with Bing Crosby. Because of that interview, a bazillion people were following him. And he said, on the putting green, Mr. Hogan walked up to him and said, young man, I understand we're playing together today. Have a great round. And he never said another word to me until that tee. He said, I birdied 15, so I'm on the tee, and I don't know what to hit. He said, there's a little mist and a little tiny rain, and the wind's blowing on and off in our face. And I turn around and I look, and here's Bing Crosby, all his Hollywood friends, all the media, all these people, because they'd read this was going to be Hogan's last. We had probably 300 people following our group. So I couldn't lay up. So I took my driver, I hit it as hard as I could, I knocked it in the middle of the green. So as I was walking back to my bag, I heard footsteps, and I looked down, and I see Hogan's shoes, and I look down more, and Hogan has an iron in his hand. And he gets to his bag, and he slams that iron in the bag, and he says, young man, that was the most dumbass shot I've ever seen in my life. And he pulled out a wood and knocked it on the green. But he was going to lay up and tell this young punk.
Yeah.
So that's one of my favorite stories.
All right. What else we got? You got number 8?
Well, that's kind of a fun one, number 8. In fact, number 7 in the scene is Lee Trevino, who became a friend of mine. And I don't know if you remember, but during one of the old Skins games, Lee made a hole-in-one on 17 to win the most amount of money ever at the time with one shot. It was like $150,000. It was
That's right.
carryover Skins. So they asked me to do a painting of that for the next year's Pro-Am tee gift. And part of my deal was I got to play in the Pro-Am. So I drew Nicholas for 9 holes. And it was almost embarrassing because I knew Jack, but not real well, but I knew him. And we played with Larry Gatlin, and we played with the president of some bank in Canada and the president of one of the rent-a-car, Hertz Rent-A-Car. So these are all pretty big wigs, and then there's nobody me, right? Well, Jack never talked to those guys. He talked to me the whole time because we had so much in common with golf design and so forth. So during that round, I said, you know, Jack, I've read somewhere where your absolute favorite shot in golf is the second shot on 8 at Bevel. He goes, it is. And I said, man, I have always wanted to paint that. And he says, why don't you? And I said, well, you know, with credentials and everything, we're only allowed an arm's length inside the ropes. And the key to the beauty of that hole and the drama is to be a little closer so you can see what you have to hit over, looking down the beach. That's the cool shot. And he said, well, why don't you just walk with me when I play my practice run? I tee off at 10 on Tuesday mornings. And I said, God, that'd be great. So the week before, Friday before the Crosby, the following year, the phone in the gallery rings and my assistant picks it up. Says, yes. He says, is Jim Fitzpatrick there? Yes, he is. Can I tell him who's calling? And he says, yes, this is Jack Nicklaus. She can't talk. She goes blank. Jim, you know, and Jack was just saying, well, I'm just checking to see if you're going to be there on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, I walked with him. We got to this spot. I probably took 30 pictures of him hitting shots at impact, full follow through, top of his backswing. And so I did a painting of Jack hitting that shot. But this has a family group in there, because what I've done, which is what I do with a lot of my things, is I scan them before I put anybody in them. and then I could print them on canvas and come back and hand paint other people into the scene.
Very
And
cool.
that's always fun.
That's very cool.
What about Hogan? Obviously my favorite. That was my hero growing up.
Yeah. Well, gosh. I mean, we did this for the Hogan tour when it originated, and I got to get up and speak. I remember one time. You're from Texas, so you know it, but very few people know. I mean, he couldn't beat Byron Nelson
No.
when they were kids. And he lost in the caddy championship with Byron, and he was just the second guy, but he worked his butt off. That's the kind of game. He was like Kite, he was just
Yep.
a workaholic.
Grinder.
And a lot of people don't know this, but he witnessed his dad
Yep.
commit suicide.
Yep, I know that story very well.
And I think that's what motivated him. I think somewhere in his character he says, "My dad gave up, I am never giving up." And when Hogan turned pro, he didn't make it the first 3 or 4 years. He ran out of money and had to go home and work at a gas station to get enough money to get back on the tour. And finally, one year, actually here in California, at Claremont Country Club, they used to have the Oakland Open there, and Sam Snead won his very first tour event one year. Hogan earned his first top 10. But he had said before that event, he said, "If I don't do good, I'm going home and I'm done because I don't have any money." And he went out after one of the rounds and somebody had stole the tires off his car. And so he said, "That's it. I'm done. I'm quitting. I can't even afford to get a new tire." Well, happened to be standing there was Eddie Lowry, the guy who caddied for Francis Ouimet when he won the Open back in 1913. And Eddie Lowry was a car dealer in San Francisco. And every great player that came out of San Francisco, he helped. And he said that day, he said, "Ben, don't even worry about it. I'll take care of that tire. You should be concentrating on golf. You're more than good enough. You should be out here and just don't even think about money. Just go play golf." And with that confidence, Ben went out and scored his first top 10, made enough money to fix his tire himself, and never looked back.
That's a cool story.
That's a
It
great-
happens.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stories on tour that they're great stories, but that's to me my favorite.
Yeah, that's one of the greatest. And he's,
So he's down and out. He's done.
in those early days, a lot of courses did not have driving ranges. Like today, everybody has a driving range. But Hogan would find a hole on the outskirts of the golf course after he played it. He'd go out there and drop balls and hit a shag bag and just hit balls till dark. And the other players, they thought he was crazy. But then finally, when he proved himself, and then they started building driving ranges everywhere. I think he's the only guy. When Hogan hit balls on the range, everybody else stopped and walked over to see him because he was such a pure ball striker.
Yeah, you ought to hear Crosby talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody, anybody, even Jack Nicklaus would stop and watch.
Yep.
Yeah, so good. So, and like I said, he's my hero. Just all the stories, and he was the greatest ball striker, in my opinion, of all time. He and Trevino, probably.
Yeah.
But
But I like the other story about, years later when he was retired playing at Shady Oaks, he would play, daily, and he'd hit a ball on the green, and then he'd walk to the next tee. Because guys would ask him, "Well, why don't you putt?" He said, "Well, they had just come out with the Iron Byron putter, so they could putt perfectly." And he would drop a ball down and use this putting machine, and it would do 3 different things from the same exact spot. And he said, "Putting is not an exact science. I'm not interested."
Yeah. What about the U.S. Girls Junior Championship there?
Well, that's very exciting because here at Poppy Hills, it's the first golf organization that's owned its own golf course. And they built this thing, I don't remember how many years ago, but Robert Trent Jones Jr. designed it, and they built it, and that's the iconic tree that used to be right out here. It came down a couple of years ago, but the United States Golf Association deemed it worthy, and they had in 2018 the U.S. Girls Junior Championship here. First time they had a USGA event at Poppy Hill. So I was contracted to do the painting, which I love. And it's actually a friend of mine in the painting. I did it with nobody in it, and then they said, well, you know, we need a young girl in there. And up in Sacramento where I live, we had a gal who was a friend of mine. I call her my range rat buddy because we both hit balls all the time together. So I had her pose for me and put her in there. And it was very successful.
Very cool. What about the Crosby there?
You know, now we're going to go back to this again. 16 at Cypress. That's another 16 story. But Bing's event, and everybody that plays professional golf on the tour owes him a debt, because before Crosby, they didn't make money. And Bing loved golf. He was actually good enough to have played professional golf, but he was such an unbelievable singer that he didn't pursue that. But he traveled with his golf clubs, and when he was on location for a movie, he would play golf by himself every morning because he loved the game so much, and they weren't allowed to shoot anything in the early morning because he was playing golf. And his problem was that he said, you know, all my friends are just as busy as I am. He had a lot of athlete friends and people from Hollywood, and he never got to hang with them. So he said that he owned a horse at Del Mar Racetrack. That was his other passion, was racing horses. So he started a little event called the Clam Bake at Rancho Santa Fe, and he invited all his buddies to come down and spend a weekend. And they played golf, and they ate, and they drank, and they entertained. And it was just a fun event. Then one of his buddies said, hey, Bing, why don't you think about bringing that tournament to your home ground here? You know, we got plenty of golf courses up in the peninsula. And he said, you know what? That's a good idea. Why don't you put a little group together and we'll sit down and talk about it? So they had a meeting here, and I still don't know who. I've talked to people, but most of them are gone by now. Anyway, in the middle of the meeting, one of the guys said, well, you know, we could play multiple golf courses. There's so many to pick from. And so the concept of the Crosby playing the 3 different courses and ending up at Pebble was developed in that meeting. And one of the guys said, oh my God, we could play Cypress. And he says, they'd never let us. Bing's eyes lit up. And he goes, are you kidding? That is a great idea, and we can play Cypress. I can make that happen. And so everybody got all excited. And they went on to talk about other things. And about 20 minutes later, one of the guys said, you know what? Cypress isn't going to work. And they all said, why? Well, that's 16th hole. That's okay for the pros. But the amateurs, they can't make that carry. It'll be a 4-hour backside. And Bing said, you know what? I understand your concern, but why don't we do this? Before we make a final decision, I'll make a starting time. We'll all go play, and you make the decision firsthand while we're on the property. So the next week, they all go out to play. They get to this hole. Bing tees it up, hits the ball. 1. He makes an ace. Turns to the group and says, you know, I don't think it's that hard a hole. So that's how the Crosby came to be played at Cypress Point.
Very cool. Very cool.
And of course, my picture also has Nathaniel in there, because his son, who was a great golfer, that's him jumping up in the air when he won the amateur at Olympic Club.
Very cool. Let's go up to the top right, 2020 PGA
Oh, yeah. Well, again, you know, I love the Northern California history, and this guy, even though he's not playing good this week, but what a solid game he has.
Oh, man.
And that shot he made, that's, you know, Colin Morikawa, but a graduate from Cal, so he was very familiar with Harding Park. But oh my gosh, driving that green and making that putt for eagle when he had to do it, that's just phenomenal. But his swing is so sound. Of course, you as an instructor, I know, but I watch that guy swing and you go, how can he ever hit it crooked?
Yeah.
The guy has got such a great swing, and he's really got a super head on his shoulders.
Yeah.
I think he's he's going to go places.
I do too. With
Yeah.
that swing, it is art. I mean, that's when you draw up a swing. If you could draw it up, every swing's going to
yeah.
be different. It's all it's going to be always that way. But it just looks perfect. If you could build one, you'd build it like that.
Absolutely, for sure.
All right. Any other pictures you want to go or paintings you want to go over?
Well, another Northern California player, which is Tony Lima, and Tony's another one of the proteges of Francis Ouimet, his little caddy, Eddie Lowry, when he was a car dealer here in Northern California. Every great player worked for him, including Tony Lima. And one of my friends from Sacramento beat Tony one year in the San Francisco City. So he became a president of a bank, and he had me do this drawing. He said, I want a drawing of Tony Lima and a drawing of one other guy. So I'm doing this, and I'm looking at this photograph that I did the drawing from, and I keep looking at the caddy, and it's bugging me, because I know that caddy. And I'm going, now Tony won the British Open in 1964. And that caddy, that looks like Tip Anderson, who is Arnie's caddy. And I'm going, how can that possibly be? Because Arnie won 2 Opens right before this. And how could his caddy be caddying for Tony Lima? So I called Mr. Palmer, and he says, no, you're right. He said, I was just in a slump, and because I was playing so poorly, and I was 2-time defending champion, I just didn't want to embarrass myself. So I had made up my mind I wasn't going. And he says, I was at an event, and Arnold used to carry a second bag to all the golf tournaments filled with putters. He changed putters like people change socks. So he's always tinkering on the putting green. So he's out there one time, and in this day and age, back then, you could win a British Open, and you wouldn't make enough money to pay for your trip. So very few players could go. He started the whole thing because he said, hey, that's the home of golf, where golf started, and we should honor that. And so he said, I'm going. So he went and won 2 of them. And then the Americans started to fall in order, and they all started to go. But anyway, Tony said, knowing there wasn't much money, he said, Arn, I'm thinking about playing in the British Open this year. What do you think? He said, no, I think you should. He said, it's going to be at St. Andrews, and that's the home of golf. I think you should go. He says, okay. And while he was standing there with Arnold, he also picked up a putter, and he was fiddling around. And he says, Arn, this putter feels pretty good. What do you take for it? And well, Arnold collects clubs, and Arnold doesn't give clubs away. He says, you can use it, but I'm not giving it to you. When you're done, I want it back. And as they talk, he said, in fact, if you're going to go, if you agree you're going to go play, he said, I'm going to set you up with my caddy, because he knows that course better than anybody. So in 1964, when Tony Lima won the British Open, he won with Arnold's caddy on his bag, his putter in his bag. And nobody knows that story.
No, I didn't know that. Well, Jim, I don't know. You got anything else you want to cover?
Well, of course, you know, with the Open going on, this is still maybe the most iconic shot in all of golf, in all of Open history, is Tom Watson sinking that chip from that U.S. Open rough. I mean, look at the rough behind him. It was this high, and he pulled his tee shot on 17 into that rough. And Jack Nicklaus had finished, and he was up in the booth, and the announcer, after Tom hit that shot, said, well, Jack, you just won your 4th Open. And they were already congratulating him because it was impossible. Anyway, when he got down to where the ball was, his caddy said, boss, he said, hit it close. And I don't think a lot of people know this, but
I know this one.
Tom looked at him and says, close hell, I'm knocking it in.
Knocking it in.
And he holes out that sand shot, and it's just phenomenal. So
Yeah, and that lie you had too, just not just the lie, the downhill part of that
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. Everything
it's
about
an
that was
impossible shot.
it's impossible.
Yeah, but he was a great chipper. God, what a great chipper.
He was a freak.
So I actually ended up years later doing the original painting for his caddy, and that was a wedding gift to his caddy.
Very cool. And that'd have been Bruce.
Bruce Edwards,
Yeah,
when
Bruce
he got
Edwards.
married, he got married on the 18th hole at Pebble Beach.
Yep. I think did Jim Nance, he proposed his wife on 7, right? Was it on 7?
Well, I did a painting for him too.
Pretty cool.
He actually has a house at Pebble Beach, and he has a copy of that green in his backyard. Of course, not with the water,
Right.
but
Very
he's got
nice.
the contours and everything.
That's pretty cool.
Very cool.
Well, I think we'll start to wrap it up unless you got anything else.
I got nothing other than we're in a great place here in Monterey,
Yep.
which is actually what got me started. I was watching on TV when I was a teenager, and I watched the Crosby, and I fell in love with the place. And when I got my license, when I turned 16, the first place I went out of Sacramento was here to watch the Crosby. Very cool. Great place.
So tell us about your website, how people can find your work.
Well, it's the J. Fitzpatrick collection, and it's it's easy to find.
Yeah. Go there.
We don't have everything on there because I got way too much stuff, but if you contact us, I probably have your favorite player or your favorite hole, and just communicate with us and we'll figure out what we can do.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Again, I'm Matt Christian with EliteGolfPerformance.net, and I want to thank Ning for helping us today do the video, and we're going to call it a wrap.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was awesome.